Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me. My name is Kim. I'm one of the financial wellness coaches here at the New Hampshire Federal Credit Union Centers for Finance and Education. And today we're going to be talking about buying a home, but it's going to be a little bit different. This one's going to be geared more toward that that's one of your goals is to buy a home. So what can you do to get ready now? So this webinar is all about home buying readiness and how we get to a place where we can start thinking about it now and be ready for it. And typically, if you haven't started yet with the home buying readiness part of things, it may take a couple years, 3, maybe even 5 years before you have the necessary things you need to have in place to buy a home. So this isn't something where we can just look at what you got and say, okay, you got to do this, and in 6 months you're ready to buy. Usually, if you haven't looked at this yet, it can take 2 to 5 years to be ready. Okay, which depending on the market is not a bad thing. If it's a seller's market, then you really want to try not to buy anyway. And so when it is a seller's market, that's probably when you feel less pressure in buying. Okay. And the reason why is just it can cost a lot more to purchase a home in a seller's market than it does in a buyer's market. Okay, so but yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to jump right in. We're going to talk about how we can get ourselves ready. Now, if you have any questions for us throughout this presentation, make sure to type those in. Okay, so you're going to use a control panel. There's going to be it's like an orangey red arrow box up at the top that controls your control panel. So if it's minimized, click on that little arrow and it's going to maximize the control panel. And you're going to see a tab that says questions. Type in your question and it will get sent to us. We will not address questions during the presentation, though. What's going to happen is we will receive an email with the questions, and we're actually going to send, if we do get questions, we'll send out a follow-up email with the questions and those answers within the next business day. Okay? You will automatically get a recap email with the recording of this presentation. That is going to be automatic. The questions will be separate. Okay? All right. And I don't want you to think that there's anything holding you back from doing questions. We want you to ask questions, okay? Because we do this education because we know that people don't have this information and they need it, okay? So if you don't understand something that we're saying, it doesn't mean that you heard it wrong. It doesn't mean that we're explaining it wrong. It just means that it might need to be explained slightly differently. I know when I've been in college and had my professors, and sometimes someone will say something and I'm like, it just, and they could see, because I wear my emotions on my sleeve, so they could see the blank look. And they're like, let me try explaining it a different way. And that helps. It helps me. It helps, people that we coach all the time, because everyone's different and everyone learns slightly differently. And so sometimes you just need that. You just need it explained a different way, or just maybe a little bit more explanation. And don't ever feel bad for that. It's something that I have never been shy about me not getting something, because I'm like, I might be the only one, but I did not get that. So please don't ever hesitate with any questions with us. You're very understanding. Very understanding. Okay, let's start right in. All right, so what can we help you with? So, with the centers, as I was mentioning, with being a financial wellness coach, is we help people with looking at what they currently have financially and some of their goals and what we might need to do now to be able to get you in a really good spot to reach those goals and make sure those. So, what we do is they say that any goal without a plan is a dream. And so, what we like to do is we like to help build that plan with you. So, your goal is now going to be attainable. Okay. So, we figure out how much you can afford. So, and we do this all through cash flow statements and budgets. I know it sounds really technical, but it actually really isn't. Um, it's just checking your income versus your outflow. That's all. We figure out how much money you'll need. You know, how much you have, how much you'll need, roughly. Or what we say is how much money you'll need to start saving to be able. If we say you're saving this much each month, by here you'll be at this point. Great. A big one is your credit score, and we're going to be talking about that briefly today. We actually have another seminar coming up, another presentation coming up that focuses just on credit score because that is a very hot topic that has a lot of information that goes in with it. So that's why we can actually make its own presentation regarding that. So we're just going to be touching on that lightly today, but we will be having a full presentation. So if you watch this presentation and that's something that you're interested in, definitely sign up for that upcoming one on credit. Okay. And if you are closer to buying a house than you originally thought and you're on, because some people just save, and they're like, I don't know if I'm good. And they're actually like, oh no, you could probably do that right now if you wanted to. But we also on our website, www.nhfcu.org, you can actually look at our mortgage products and actually speak to a representative regarding those. So we have that here. We've been able to add, we're partnering with a company, and we're able to have a lot more products for you. We wanted to make sure that we were really here for our members and that we offered the best products that we could. And so we have that in place. So that's been wonderful. All right, so let's jump. All right, so this is what I was talking about a little bit earlier. We're talking about real estate markets. And it's been kind of funky with the rates going up and slightly going down and then going up again and then slightly going down. So rates have been everywhere. So we'll talk about your readiness when it comes to rates. Because of what the rate will do is that will affect your bottom line. So for instance, when we were looking to purchase a home, we were looking for a couple years in that time frame that it was really hostile. Interest rates were extremely low, inventory was low, and therefore prices were high. But due to our family circumstances, we needed to get out of renting and we needed to purchase a home. And by the time we finally found a home, the interest rates were up above 7%. So yay, lucky us. So what that meant for us is we knew how much, and this is the process that we're going to go through today with you, is we knew, because we have a budget, we work on a budget, we knew how much we were able to afford monthly for a mortgage comfortably. Okay. And so what we then looked at was, okay, with interest rates being what they are, this is the ultimate balance of the house that we can afford. When the interest rates were low, we could afford a $420,000 home. Not too shabby. Now, the mortgage lender wanted to approve us for a lot more because they said we could afford a lot more, but we know our finances, and that's something we're going to talk about as well. You know your finances, they do not. Okay. So that's why you need to come up with this plan and not have them tell you what you can or cannot afford. Okay. But once the interest rates started to go up, because now we're paying more interest, when they started to reach 7%, there was no longer any way we could afford a $420,000 home. We could afford a $300,000 home. And that's just because of the interest and how much more we'd be paying in interest. And we stuck to our guns and we said, no, this is what we can afford. This is what we're doing. We're not going above this. And that's what we did. Okay. Also, home values. What do they look like? I was talking about seller's market versus buyer's market. In a seller's market, that means when you have a seller's market, it means you have low inventory and you have a ton of buyers that want to buy. So sellers can be picky. They can pick the cream of the crop offers and go from there. Okay, that's why it's called the seller's market, because it favors the sellers. Okay, and then you have a buyer's market, which is exactly the opposite. Ton of inventory. So there's a ton of people trying to sell their house, but there's not that many buyers out there. Well, now it's a buyer's market because now they can be picky because people are just groveling, saying, buy my house, buy my house. That they'll pay for closing costs. And that is one thing that a lot of people will wait for a buyer's market, but it hasn't been a buyer's market for a while. But yeah, so we'll get into that. So what type of market is it? We always planned when we were saving for a home, since we were going to be buyers, we knew that there was the chance that we might have to buy a house in the seller's market. So we made sure when we planned our finances that we planned worst case scenario. Okay. Values are going to be higher. We're going to need a bigger down payment or earnest money. We'll talk about that. And that, we need to pay for closing costs. So that's why it's good to know what type of market it is. So if you plan for worst case scenario, that it's a seller's market when you buy, then you'll actually be okay. Are you prepared with the best offer? This comes down to being purchase ready. Are you ready to buy a home? Because if you don't have any savings, then you're really not, and you don't have the best offer. Because there's somebody coming in that's probably going to be putting money down on this house. Some earnest money, we'll talk about that. But also maybe their financing just looks better, right? So that's what we're talking about. And do you currently rent? So when my husband and I were when we knew we wanted to pay down our debt before we owned a home, because we didn't want to have a bunch of credit card debt. We didn't want our student loans. We didn't want any personal loans. We didn't want anything. Because we knew that buying a home, there's a lot that goes into buying a home. It is expensive. And, if we need to fix things and we need to take out credit, if we do, we wanted to make sure we had that available. Last thing we would want to do is purchase a home, have to fix something, and not be able to, which is exactly what happened to us. We purchased a home and found out that after we moved in, we found out that the attic floor was bowing when my husband was moving stuff into the attic and the kitchen ceiling started to bow. We're like, oh my God, he's going to come through. Come to find out there was a leak where the roof met each other, so they call that the flashing. There was a leak and it must have been there forever. Our inspector missed it. And what it did was it softened the entire floor, well, of the attic, which was the ceiling of the kitchen. So we had to get the roof replaced, we had to get the floor done, and we're still waiting to get the ceiling done. And that's something that we had the cash reserves to do, right? Because we knew that there was going to be something going on with the house. There always is. No matter how old the house is, there's usually something going on with the house. So just because you're buying something new or newer doesn't mean that there's not going to be. I've heard where there's new constructions and after a year, the actual weight-bearing beam, in the basement that's kind of holding the house up, was cracking and had to be fixed. And that's like a $30,000. And that was in a 1-year-old home. So not to scare you, but just because you're buying something newer, we ended up buying an old home. Just because you buy something newer doesn't mean it's not going to need repairs. Especially now that everyone is do-it-yourselfers and they watch a YouTube video. And so there's been some horror stories of people buying houses and it's just been, done from do-it-yourselfers. So not saying that that's bad, just saying that sometimes it doesn't get done correctly. Okay. So you want to be prepared. Anywho, so determine if buying or renting is meant for you. So for the first part of our relationship, renting was for us because we had debt. We wanted to pay that off. We knew if we bought a home, we wouldn't have been able to pay that off, right? Because something always happens, karma, not karma, but Murphy's Law. Something always happens. So we didn't want to worry about the dishwasher going, the stove breaking, the refrigerator breaking. And so we had a landlord. So if anything happened, we would be able to contact them. If we had a plumbing issue, we'd contact them. If we had any type of issue, we'd contact them. That way we could focus our attention on our debt and pay off our debt and not have to worry about contending with appliances at the same time. Okay. And that allowed us to pay down our debt and to build a really good home buying fund. Okay. So when someone tells you, why are you renting? It's less expensive to buy or to have a mortgage. That's true. Typically, when you buy a home, the mortgage is less expensive than if you were looking at a rental unit with the same square footage, the same bedrooms, and this and that. But in the same instance, you are responsible for all the repairs. So even though month to month it's a little bit cheaper, it can add up and it can be a lot more expensive in the long run. Okay? So again, if renting is what you need to do right now to make sure that you have more cash flow and that you can pay down your debt and not have to worry about, then by all means rent away. And don't let anyone make you feel wrong for renting because it's not their finances. If they want to buy and they do, fine, go for it. But you have a plan, right? So now this is this is going to be the Deborah Downer for you guys. Costs associated with buying a home. So earnest money. So earnest money is also known as a good faith deposit. You typically see this at maybe 1 to 3% of a home purchase. And what this is it's kind of like putting the house on hold, kinda. You say, yep, I'm willing to put this down. So that way the seller knows that you are truly interested in this house. Because what happens if you put earnest money down and everything's going well, and then you just kind of back out for no reason? You're like, I don't want this house. The seller will actually get those funds, whatever you put down for earnest money. Okay. If something comes back on the inspection and it can't be rectified or agreed upon, then if you back out, then you get your money back because it wasn't something that you just said, nah, I'm going to go with something else. Something better came up. You have a legitimate reason for backing out of that purchase. Okay. When we were purchasing a home, a lot of the sellers, because it was a seller's market and it was a crazy seller's market, they weren't looking at anyone's application unless they had $25,000 down as earnest money. So that was a bit scary. That was because in the beginning we weren't putting that much down. You know, we were doing the typical 1 to 3%, and that was it. And our realtor was like, well, they're getting more aggressive. I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to have a heart attack. Down payment. So depending on the loan that you go with, the typical down payment is usually around 3%. Okay. So if you're looking at a home, let's say you're looking at a $200,000 home and you have to put 3% down. That's $6,000. So you have to have $6,000 that you can put down on that home. Okay. And think about that. If 3%, if you're doing the earnest money too, that's another $6,000. So now you're up to $12,000. Okay. Inspections. I will never tell anyone. There have been some realtors that will tell you to skip inspections, especially in a seller's market. We held true. We're like, we're not skipping it. This is a big purchase for us. We're first-time home buyers. We're not skipping inspections. We need to know that what we're buying is not going to fall down after a year. Like, we need to make sure. Okay. So inspections, typically a home inspection is about $500, plus or minus, depending on location, the size of the house, who you go with. And then you have other things, depending on the type of house you're looking at. You have water, you have radon, and sometimes there's other, like if you have a working chimney, you want to get someone in there to inspect the chimney. So there's other things. So usually what we say is usually plan between $1,000 to $2,000 for inspections at least. And the crazy thing is this is per house. So if you put in an offer on one house, you do the inspections and it doesn't come back good. And they're like, no, like we see mold. You might want to get a mold specialist in here. Say the mold specialist comes in and it's that nasty mold, and they're like, no, you don't want, nope, this is bad. Well, you still have to pay for those inspections, even though you're not purchasing the house. So then you find another house and you go through the same process. They accept your application and you go ahead and you have to do the inspections again on that house. So there's another. So depending on what type of market it is, with the seller's market, what was great was none of our offers got approved. So we didn't have to worry about having too many inspections done because we couldn't even get past the offer part of things. So that was one good thing about a seller's market. Probably the only good thing when you're buying a house at a seller's market. But so you might want to even prepare to have maybe a little bit more for those inspections. Repairs. So in a seller's market, the houses that were going while we were looking were horrific. Like, there was homes where you could tell that there was an anxious dog and they chewed all the door frames, they were chewing the drywall, all the floors needed to be redone, the windows were leaking. Oh my God. And but because it was such a hot market, the owners could sell it like that and not have to worry about fixing up the house because they know the house was going to get sold. That's a darn good market for sellers. But that means all those repair costs fall on you. Okay, so having a little bit for repairs, let's say you have $5,000 aside for repairs. So once you move in, if there's anything that you find that you need to update right away that the sellers weren't willing to do, you have the funds for that. Okay. Closing costs. So this is where in a seller's market, they'd laugh at you if you asked for the seller to pay for the closing costs. In a buyer's market, because sellers are so anxious to have you buy their house, they'll usually roll those closing costs in. And once I say this number, you're going to see why you prefer to buy in a buyer's market, because closing costs can be up to, usually they say the average is around $15,000 for closing costs. And that's about our closing costs. I think were ended up being $14,000. So yeah, that's right about there. Okay. So I know this is going to be a huge Debbie Downer. So between 1 and 5, it comes up to a total of $34,000 to be saved. Okay. Now we are going to talk. There are some mortgages out there, first time home mortgage, that you can get, 0 down payment, closing costs are 0. Usually it's a higher interest rate. So you're ultimately paying for it, but over time and not all in one chunk. So what I always recommend is looking at mortgage companies, seeing what they have, what their programs look like, and kind of figuring out what might be best for you when making your plan to say, okay, this is what I'm looking at. This is how much they recommend that I save. Because there's so many different plans out there, and I am not a mortgage lender, so I don't know all the products. But it's something where you can go to them and even on our website, and you can talk with a mortgage professional, and they can ask you questions, see where you are, and recommend products for you. And then they'll say, yes, so for this product, you probably want to make sure you have saved up this amount of money. Okay. So that's going to be something good to do. And then you have moving expenses and furniture. This is something that we put on here just to make sure that, cause some people forget about this. Like they're moving out of a friend's apartment and they don't have furniture, and they're like, oh, wait a minute. Now, the one thing you have to remember about this stuff, the furniture especially, is do not purchase this until you closed on your home. Okay. Because that can actually mess up the entire financing. A mortgage lender will tell you, don't mess with your credit if you're going through the process. So now that I told you that it can come up to like $34,000 to have in savings, you might be like, well, a house is out of my league. Not necessarily. I'm just letting you know that that's like worst case scenario, right? And again, different mortgage products offer different breaks on different things, and cash back and having closing costs covered. And so as long as you qualify for them. So it's one of those things to definitely look into. But once we know, like once you talk to the mortgage professional, the mortgage lender, and you guys figure out what type of product that you want and how much you need to save, now what we have to do is we have to look at your budget, okay? Because we have to say, okay, we need to save this much. How are we going to save that? And the budget is what is going to make, that's going to be your plan to reach that goal. Okay. So what the budget is, it helps us identify what you have coming in for income. And then we make a plan of how we have it setting up going out. So we cover bills, we cover expenses. So this is an example of a zero-based budget. No, it's definitely bigger than this, but I wanted to make sure you guys could see it to reference it. But this is usually 2 pages long. But it has everything from, it's not just bills. So a lot of people think a budget just is pertaining to bills, like your rent, your electricity, gas, water, anything that you're doing like that. But it also includes expenses. So gas for your vehicle, maintenance, clothing, pocket money. Do you have an emergency fund? Do you get your hair done every 4 weeks or 6 weeks? It covers everything, okay? Not just your bills, not just your car loan or your credit cards. It covers everything. And that's where people have the disconnect. They're like, no, I have my bills and I make plenty of money. You make plenty of money to cover your debts. But what about your expenses? And that's what we go over, okay? That's what we identify. We want to make sure that you have plenty of, that we're taking care of what needs to be taken care of. And also the budget will actually identify areas where we might be able to create more cash flow. Usually insurance is one of them. Vehicle insurance, home insurance. Working on that will sometimes be hugely beneficial in shopping around because you can save a ton of money switching companies, right? Same with cable and internet and all that jazz. Sometimes you can save money, okay? Again, we talked about credit. So this is another thing. When we talk about credit, your credit, because a home is such a big purchase, and with your interest rate depends on your credit score, this is something that you can actually control. We couldn't control when the Fed kept raising rates and the mortgage rate started at 7.35. We couldn't control that. But what we could control is having an amazing credit score. So no matter what the market looked like, we were always going to get the best rate. Because you don't want to skimp off on the credit score and then all of a sudden you go in and you find out that the rates are maybe 5%, but because of your credit score, you're looking more at 10%. Because that's something you can control, okay? And that 5% interest could cost you $100,000 of purchasing power, okay? So that's something that we can also do. We can look at your credit. If we need to improve that, there's ways that we can improve that. And we'll look at, what's reporting on there. And if you have any collections that we have to take care of. But we'll also look at the other debts. So this is going to be very important too, is debt to income ratio. So when we look at this, or when a lender looks at this, they usually generally 43% is the highest. So what debt to income ratio is, it's just your income versus your total payments, your debt payments. So we look at your credit report, see what's reporting on there for debt payments, and then we look at your income, your net income after, all the deductions, and we look at that net income and you do the debt payments divided by the net income, and that will give us your debt to income ratio. So that's another thing where it falls, where we use that credit and we use the debts that are reporting on your credit report to help us see your your bigger picture, because if you're above that 43%, then we need to work on a plan to get you below that, right? So what that means is we're going to have to start working on debts and paying them down faster. You can do a debt consolidation if it's a lot of credit cards. You can definitely try. You do have to get approved for those loans, so it's not automatic, but it's something that to definitely look into. This was one of our clients where she had $18,000 in credit card debt. Her interest rate averaged on 21.91. She was paying a monthly payment of $724, and these were minimum payments. These were not exaggerated payments. She wasn't paying extra. These were minimum payments that she was paying. Okay. So, and then you can see the interest paid. If she was continued to do the minimum payments, this is how much interest she would pay on those cards. $14,769. And so if she just paid the minimum, because she couldn't afford more than this, if she paid just the minimum, then she's looking at, instead of paying $18,000 for her purchases, she's actually paying almost $33,000 for those purchases. Okay. And this is how much time it would take to pay off those credit cards if she just did the minimum payments. So that's ouchy. And if you're saving for a home and you kind of have this situation, you're gonna be like, this is just not gonna work at all. So what we talk about is we actually, with the debt consolidation, if you're looking at a loan amount of the 18.1, right? Do a 5-year term. Interest rate at that point was 12.99 monthly. If you're looking at doing a debt consolidation and that's your interest rate, then your monthly payment on the loan will be $411. That's a lot better than $724. And your interest will be $6,604.28, which is a lot better, than having it be that 14,000. Okay. So ultimately you're saving about $8,000 on interest alone by consolidating that. Okay. And so what that helps is, because your payment is now lower, when it comes to your debt to income ratio, when they calculate that, your actually debt payments are lower because now you're paying only $411 instead of $724. So that actually helps your debt to income ratio. Okay. So that's something that is huge, can be hugely beneficial, because you're cutting that credit, you can count it as a credit card bill, that you're cutting it in half. Okay. So if we're able to do that, and then also refinance your vehicle because you might have had a higher rate. We creating more cash flow by, looking at the debts that you currently have, and, getting you in a better place can really help. Okay. Now, if you were unable to do any type of debt consolidation, which happens because you still have to get approved for that loan, if something happens and we have to do it manually, then we're going to go ahead, and I prefer the debt snowball. I absolutely love the debt snowball. And this is an example where you list your debts from lowest to highest balance. Okay, so we're going to start with the lowest debt first. We're going to focus any extra funds. So after we do our budget, if we have any extra funds, we're going to now count that toward the minimum payment of debt A. Okay. And then what we'll do is, once that debt, so let's say this minimum payment was $25, and we had an extra $75 in our budget after we did bills and expenses. So that new minimum payment is now 100. Okay. We focused the extra money on debt A, but you can see we're still doing the minimum payments on all the other loans. Okay. And so once we pay off debt A, we can now take that 100, move it down here, add it to the 50, and now your new minimum payment for loan number 2 or debt B would be 150. Okay. And now you pay off debt B, that 150 comes down here, you add it to the 50, and now your new minimum payment for debt C is 200. Okay. Same goes down here. And the reason why we want you to do smallest debt to largest debt is because you pay it off faster. Okay, you pay the smallest debt off faster. It helps keep momentum going, and it's exciting. And by paying these down, as you're paying this down, that's helping your debt to income, and it's helping your credit score. It's helping a lot of different factors. Okay, so that's typically the order that we actually will help you, and we'll have you, if that's something that you want to look at, then we'll definitely help you with the budget, knowing what you have coming in, where things are going out, have suggestions on where to lower costs, like I mentioned, like insurance, mobile phone, cable, things like that. And then we will look at your debts, see what we need to do for there. Do we need to lower them? Are you doing pretty good? Do we not even need to touch them? Or what we might do for a plan for that. And then once we have those things situated, then we can really focus on setting up a plan to save for the home. But really, we have to take care of those other things first, because no matter how much savings that we do, if you don't have a good credit score, if you have bad debt to income ratio, things like that, no matter how much cash you have, you're not going to get financed for a loan. Okay? So that's typically what we do. If you have any questions, again, please go ahead and ask those, and we will send you a follow-up email with all the questions and answers. And in that email too, we will have all our information as far as how to contact us. All right. Thank you so much for joining me today. And I hope you have yourself a wonderful day. Bye-bye.